1, Ian Gray.
To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Later today, engagements to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Ian Gray.
Yesterday, the Education Secretary said that he was deeply sorry that the SNP have thrown hundreds of newly qualified teachers onto the scrap heap. Will the First Minister now do likewise and apologise too?
First Minister.
Well, given, as we know, the extraordinarily poor record where two-thirds of the fall in teacher numbers in the last year has been in Labour-controlled authorities in Scotland, and given that there are not that many Labour-controlled authorities in Scotland, I think there should be shame across the Labour benches at that dramatic statistic.
Ian Gray.
Well, clearly the First Minister doesn't share his Education Secretary's shame at this situation, which he said causes him difficulty, heartache and sleepless nights. Yesterday in the committee, Ken McIntosh referred to Alison Baird, a newly qualified primary teacher. Of her entire class, only 4 teachers have found jobs, 1 in Scotland, 1 in Spain, 1 in Kuwait and 1 in Abu Dhabi. Spain, Kuwait, Abu Dhabi, the arc of desperation for new teachers. Alison's email says, here at the top, "I'd love to be there myself," at the committee she means, "but I am lucky enough to have 2 hours' work today." What is the First Minister's advice to Alison? Should she get on a plane to the Middle East as well?
First Minister.
There's a hugely difficult situation facing a whole range of people in society, including young qualified teachers. There are 575 teachers in Scotland claiming job seekers allowance. That, in my opinion, I hope in the opinion of this Chamber, is 575 too many. It is lower than the 665 who were in that position last year. And if we compare it with the other countries in these islands, then there are less people, teachers in the workforce, 10.9% per thousand in Scotland compared to 14.5% in England, 20.8% in Wales and 41.6% in Northern Ireland on comparable figures. Now, I know that the Labour Party would like the whole country to engage in a collective amnesia about the financial position into which they brought this country. But these comparable figures from across the United Kingdom, combined with the dramatic statistic that 2/3 of the decline in teacher numbers in Scotland come in Labour-controlled or participating in administration local authorities, say at both UK level and at local government level, I don't think this is the best subject for Ian Gray to ask a question on.
Ian Gray.
My question was about the situation in Scotland. There's a pretty simple equation here in Scotland. The First Minister promised Scotland to maintain teacher numbers. But he has cut 3,000 teaching jobs, and that is in the good times when his budget was rising by around £1 billion every year. And as those 3,000 teaching jobs have gone, there are 2,900 newly qualified teachers who cannot find permanent jobs. It isn't rocket science to see what has happened here. Alison says that the jobs she applies for unsuccessfully because there are often 3, 4, 5, 6 or 700 applicants. Yesterday, Mike Russell said it will be impossible to protect teacher numbers going forward. So can the First Minister just tell us how many more teachers he plans to cut in the future?
First Minister.
The situation is hugely difficult for people facing that situation, as I've already said. But let's just get the numbers into a real context. I said that there were 575 teachers claiming job seekers allowance in Scotland. I pointed out that was lower than any of the other countries in the United Kingdom. There were 150 teaching posts advertised yesterday in the COSLA job portal. That is the reality of the statistics. Ian Gray seems to think that it's irrelevant what is happening elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Of course, it's not irrelevant because the funding that comes to the Scottish Government is determined by the funding in UK Whitehall departments. It is the reality that we don't just face the cuts from the coalition. We face this year in Scotland a £500 million cut in Scotland's finances, the first real-term decrease in Scottish spending in a generation. Now, I do know that Labour want to absolve themselves a responsibility for that situation, but the consequences facing not just our teaching profession but public services in Scotland are a combination of restrictions in spending and the economic difficulties for which the Labour Party were largely responsible, and it has to be said, Labour local authorities who account for 2/3 of the decline in teacher numbers, giving an indication that their priority for teaching is less than any of the other political parties in Scotland.
Presiding Officer, the First Minister seems to think he's irrelevant. He is in charge of our education system. And yes, let's get the numbers into context. The SNP promised to maintain teacher numbers. Yesterday, Mr Russell said that that was arbitrary and unsustainable, the number he promised. So why did he promise it if that was the case? And what about class sizes of 18, or cancelling student debt, or matching Labour's school building programme? Were they arbitrary and unsustainable promises too? Or is the truth that the First Minister is prepared to promise anything to anyone to get elected, but he never has the slightest intention of delivering?
First Minister.
Well now, let's just take a look at some of the things that Ian Gray has mentioned. He mentioned class sizes. Primary class sizes in Scotland are a record low for the 3rd year running. He mentioned the school building programme. As we now know, 303 schools have been built in Scotland, and we know that's more than Labour would have done because they only promised 250 in their last manifesto. And we also know that the finance is no concern to Ian Gray whatsoever, because falling into my hands has been ideas for a fairer Scotland. The report of the Scottish Labour policy programme, it says this document is not a costed list of Labour policies for the government. Yeah, it's a wish list, unrealistic, from a party which will never be close to government again in Scotland.